Korea bolsters venture investments by shifting the paradigm to a private-led one, while financing worth billions of dollars to help the country become a global startup powerhouse. Another grim outlook for the nation's shrinking population as the birth rate in the second quarter is lower than any other Q2 period. Starting tomorrow, COVID-19 will be treated in a similar way to the flu in Korea as the health authorities lower its disease level. New infections seem to have been on a downward trend over the last 2 weeks. It's August 30th, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We begin with the nation's ambitious plan to render South Korea a leading startup powerhouse in the world. Unveiled today was a comprehensive support plan to bolster local startups that centers on private-led growth and injecting more funds. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young reports. The government is rolling up its sleeves to become one of the world's top 3 startup nations. The goal was announced by the Ministry of SMEs and Startups on Wednesday with the comprehensive measures that unveiled during a Startup Korea strategy meeting held by President Yoon.
정부가 주도하고 있는 스타트업 생태계 역시 민간 중심, 시장 중심으로 과감하게 바꿔 나가야 된다고 생각합니다. 민간이 투자를 주도하고 스스로 생태계를 키우고 또 정부는 민간 모펀드에 대한 일정한 출자와 또 세제 지원 이런 방식으로 확대해 나가야 된다고 봅니다.
The ministry will expand venture investment by establishing a Startup Korea fund worth 2 trillion Korean won or roughly $1.5 billion in which both public and private sectors will invest. This will increase the size of venture investment from last year's $9.4 billion to $10.7 billion by 2027. Areas of investment include deep tech sectors such as system semiconductors and AI, while it will be also used for global expansion. The government is also diversifying its method of startup support, which had previously consisted of subsidies. While increasing the subsidy amounts, authorities are also reviewing a method where a portion of the additional support received would be reclaimed when revenue is generated. For instance, if there is a startup that has been receiving a subsidy of 100 million won, it would receive 130 million won in total support, with the additional 30 million won being recovered over several years once it starts making money. For the globalization of the startup and venture ecosystem, the government will also support Koreans who start businesses overseas. The global fund that supports domestic startups to go abroad will be expanded to around $7.5 billion by next year. It will also introduce a new program called Global Tips to support the startups that receive investments from foreign venture capitalists and establish offshore corporations. Within 4 years, the ministry aims to have 5 startups on the global top 100 list of unicorn companies or companies worth over $1 billion. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News. Tokyo's Fukushima water discharge has yet again sparked controversy among politicians in Korea over how to call it. Our political correspondent Lee Si-hoo has a recap of the controversy on whether it's wastewater or treated wastewater.
Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said the correct expression for the discharge from the Fukushima nuclear power plant is scientifically treated wastewater. Han made this statement at an appearance before the National Assembly's Special Committee on Budget and Accounts on Wednesday morning.
The president of the National Federation of Fisheries Cooperatives officially announced that from now on, they'll call it the Fukushima treated water.
Technically speaking, it's scientifically treated wastewater, or according to the IAEA, the Alps treated wastewater. I believe this is the scientifically correct expression. As for what the government will do about the issue, it needs more consideration.
This is despite the different terminology, including just wastewater, used by various media outlets, the Prime Minister added. On the same day, ruling People Power Party senior spokesperson Yoo Sang-bum told reporters that the term treated contaminated water should be used officially. He explained that is the official term used by the IAEA. However, the main opposition Democratic Party, which held a rally against the discharge, decried that term. DP spokesperson Lee So-young told Arirang News that the party will continue to call it wastewater, more exactly radioactive wastewater, because Japan's Alps cannot filter out all radioactive nuclides. She added that although Tokyo and the IAEA say the concentration levels are below standards, no one can know for sure exactly how many radioactive nuclides are being released. Lee Si-hu, Arirang News.
Authorities here are ramping up safety checks for seafood to ease public concerns following the Fukushima water release. Shin Se-byuk has more.
Japan's release of Fukushima wastewater is sparking concerns among South Korean fishmongers. Though yet to see a major hit in sales, there's a growing worry that fish markets will become financial victims over fears that consumers will turn their backs on seafood products.
There's this concern about whether the seafood is actually safe. It's like, can we really eat it without any worries?
To dispel public safety concerns, the government is stepping up inspections of waters surrounding South Korea as well as seafood products.
We're carrying out thorough safety checks on both the seawater and fish.
Special inspections are also being carried out. On Monday, the government kicked off a 100-day intensive inspection to monitor the marking of the origin of seafood at some 20,000 stores. This is the second intensive inspection, which follows the first round of checks in May and June. Major seafood items to be inspected include scallops, sea breams, and sea squirts. Korean fishmongers rely on Japanese imports for these products. According to government data, South Korea imported 10,610 tons of seafood from Japan in the first half of 2023, which accounts for 2% of the total. Meanwhile, the government is coming up with measures to boost seafood consumption as it strives to ensure seafood safety. It plans to hold weekend festivals and sales events across the country as part of efforts to encourage people to buy more seafood products. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
And in related news, Beijing and Tokyo continue to clash fiercely over the latter's release of wastewater and the former's related ban on all Japanese seafood products. Choi Min-jung has the latest.
Beijing's decision to ban all of its seafood imports from Japan has prompted Tokyo to threaten to take Beijing to the World Trade Organization in order to seek a reversal. Japan's Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi on Tuesday said that Japan will take necessary action under various routes, including the WTO framework. On the same day, Beijing's Foreign Ministry spokesman urged Japan to take concrete action.
In response to the Japanese side's extremely selfish and irresponsible wrong action, China and other parties at stake have the right and responsibility to take legitimate, reasonable and necessary precautionary measures to safeguard marine environment safety, food security and people's health.
In China, demand for seafood already appears to be falling, putting those in the fishing industry in a tough situation. Outraged Chinese citizens have also been dialing the numbers of Japanese businesses and institutions to complain about the release. In the 4 days following the start of the discharge, more than 6,000 calls were made to the Tokyo Electric Power Company, while 220 calls were made to police stations across Japan. Japan has also reportedly made phone calls with complaints to the Chinese embassy and consulates, something the Chinese embassy said seriously disrupts the normal operation of their offices. Flights to Japan from China have decreased by a third over the past week, and more people with flights booked are demanding refunds. According to Japanese media outlets, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will likely address the issue at the ASEAN meeting and G20 summit next month. There, he is expected to engage in dialogue with participating countries and reiterate that the wastewater discharge meets international safety standards. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The birth rate at home dropped once again to a record low 0.7 per woman in the second quarter. Now Korea has been seeing its overall population decline for nearly 4 years. Park Go-nu has the details.
South Korea's population continues to fall. According to data by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the country's population saw its 44th straight month of natural decrease. Ever since November 2019, deaths have exceeded births. The total birth rate in the second quarter was just 0.7, which is the lowest for any April to June period. This was a drop of 0.05 per woman from the second quarter of last year. The rate has been hovering under the 1 per woman mark in 2018. The number of births in the second quarter fell to its lowest ever figure, dropping by 6.8% compared to the same period in 2022. This was the 30th quarter in a row that the number of births has fallen. The birth figures for June was also down 1.6% year-on-year, a record high for any other June. An official from Statistics Korea said this was mainly caused by the shrinking number of females aged 25 and 39, and as more people are staying single or getting married later. In fact, research from the agency on Monday showed only 1 out of 3 young adults think positively about marriage, and half of them answered that having children is unnecessary. The number of deaths increased 7.6% year-on-year in June to over 26,000, which was the highest of any June since the data was first compiled in 1983. In terms of the second quarter of this year, there were 8% fewer deaths due to the base effects of COVID-19 in the second quarter of last year. Marriages in June increased 7.8% on year, while divorces were also up 2.7%. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
Guidelines for a healthcare support program for postpartum mothers and newborns provided by the government will, from this Thursday, be available in 7 languages. The Ministry of Health and Welfare offers a postpartum mothers and newborns healthcare support program to support the recovery of mothers and provide care for newborns. The program is targeted at households with incomes that are up to 150% lower than the median income, with some flexibility depending on the local government, in order to reduce difficulties faced by multiracial families that accounted for around 17% of total recipients in the first half of the year. Guidelines will now be available in 7 languages. New COVID infections have been on a downward trend in Korea over the last 2 weeks. And starting tomorrow, COVID-19 will be recategorized as a level 4 disease, the same as flu. Our Choi Soo-hyung explains what's changing.
With COVID-19's infectious disease categorization being lowered from level 2 to level 4, a care system similar to that for influenza is being implemented within the general healthcare system. Infectious diseases are categorized into different levels based on their risk of spreading. When the coronavirus was first detected here in January 2020, it was classified as a level 1 disease, a highly contagious infection, or one with the most risk of spreading. Just over 2 years later, on April 25, 2022, the government declared it a level 2 disease in the same grouping as tuberculosis, measles, and cholera, and after another year and 4 months, level 4 like the flu. The most significant change is that there will be no more daily reporting of confirmed cases numbers. Instead, the government plans to operate a more precise monitoring system to observe COVID-19 trends on a weekly basis. The system will be operated through 527 monitoring agencies, and starting on September 13th, the disease status will be announced every Wednesday. Additionally, rapid antigen and PCR testing conducted at doctors' offices and screening clinics must now be paid for. Mandatory mask wearing at high-risk facilities such as hospitals and nursing homes for the elderly will continue, as well as the recommended 5-day isolation for confirmed cases. Even with the transition to a level 4 infectious disease healthcare system, vaccinations will still be available free of charge. The government and healthcare experts strongly advise getting vaccinated, highlighting that an annual shot will effectively reduce mortality and severe illness rates among high-risk groups.
Obviously, in protection of ourselves, vaccination would be strongly recommended if a person has not gotten yet. What I've noticed more commonly recently is that people who come in with rather relatively higher or severe symptoms, they tend to have not yet experienced COVID, or they have not received vaccinations.
The government plans to maintain a direct COVID-19 response team at the Ministry of Health and Welfare instead of relying only on administrative agencies in the case of a possible winter resurgence. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Senior working-level officials from the foreign ministries of South Korea, China, and Japan are reportedly working to meet here in Seoul in late September as they seek to hold a summit between their leaders by the end of this year. Citing unnamed sources, Japan's Mainichi Shimbun reported Wednesday that the upcoming meeting is expected to be led by deputy minister-level officials and that Tokyo's senior deputy foreign minister Takahiro Funakoshi will likely attend. It also says they will likely face challenges while scheduling the summit as Beijing has been strongly protesting the Fukushima wastewater release. In response, Seoul's foreign ministry said it is currently working with relevant countries to reactivate a trilateral consultative group with the goal of holding the summit by the end of the year. The Biden administration says it remains open to dialogue with North Korea despite its leader's latest hostile rhetoric, calling the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan gang bosses. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Earlier this week, North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported that its leader Kim Jong-un slammed the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, calling them gang bosses for agreeing to regularize their joint military exercises. However, despite Kim's comments, Washington says it remains open to dialogue with Pyongyang. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said Tuesday that the U.S. has said on many occasions that they're open to dialogue with the reclusive state, and it remains true even now. Despite the U.S.'s openness to hold talks with Pyongyang, South Korean ambassador to the United States, Choi Yun-dong, said Tuesday during a forum hosted by the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies that the opportunity for reopening dialogue with North Korea is not likely for the time being. Cho also reiterated South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's stance that the continued provocations from Pyongyang will only strengthen the trilateral security cooperation between the three countries. Meanwhile, during the same event, the U.S. National Security Council Coordinator for Indo-Pacific Affairs, Kurt Campbell, highlighted the three allies' commitment to institutionalizing their three-way cooperation. Campbell stressed that what was seen in the Camp David summit was a sense of three equal, powerful, committed, determined nations meeting on equal terms, noting that no country is weaker or stronger in the alliance. However, he also said the trilateral cooperation cannot be future-proof, given the historical differences between South Korea and Japan being the major source of conflict between the two neighboring countries. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. today held a joint air drill over the West Sea involving a U.S. B-1B strategic bomber. It was part of the Ulji Freedom Shield exercise, and the nation's defense ministry says that the drill featured South Korean F-A-50 fighter jets with U.S. F-16 fighters. This marks the 10th drill this year that has mobilized at least one U.S. strategic bomber. The B-1B bomber had also been deployed to the Korean peninsula in February in response to Pyongyang's ICBM launch. The ministry said that Wednesday's drill demonstrated extended deterrence in action and pledged for stronger ties with Washington to brace for any possible provocation. Wrapping up her official trip to China, U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo says American firms have complained that China has become uninvestable, prompting Beijing to defend its business practices. Moon Hae-ryun has the details.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo has expressed concern over fines, raids, and other actions against foreign businesses in China, prompting U.S. companies to label the country uninvestable. Bloomberg reported that Raimondo spoke to reporters on a train headed to Shanghai on the third day of her trip and said the visit has reopened communication channels between the two countries' economies. She commented that it had become too risky for American businesses in China and highlighted Beijing's restrictions on Micron Technology's products. Chinese authorities also raided the offices of several U.S.-based consultancies back in March over what it said were national security concerns. However, Raimondo said that the U.S. did not want to decouple from China, with Chinese news agency Xinhua reporting that Premier Li Qiang had said during their meeting on Tuesday that economic relations between the two countries were mutually beneficial.
I mean, the U.S. and China have a massive and consequential economic relationship, which is good for the world. It is good for China. It is good for America. And we want you here investing, growing.
Raimondo's visit to China marks the most recent efforts by the Biden administration to strengthen communication, following trips by Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen earlier this year. These visits were prompted by concerns over escalating tensions between the two superpowers, particularly in economy and defense. The United States' export controls to prevent China's access to advanced semiconductors have been criticized by Beijing. Washington argues that they're essential to safeguard national security as indicated by the CHIPS Act. The Inflation Reduction Act of the United States has also encouraged car makers to shift supply chains out of China. Raimondo is due to wrap up her visit to Shanghai with a meeting with the local party secretary and Shanghai Disney. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
A wildfire that's been burning in northeastern Greece for 11 days has destroyed an area that's larger in size than New York City. The European Union-backed Copernicus Climate Change Service said Tuesday local time that the fire quickly spread across the Everest regions after beginning near the city of Alexandroupolis on August 19th. At least 20 people have been killed in the last week. The spokesperson for the EU said over 81,000 hectares had been burnt, making it the largest wildfire since 2000. The EU's Civil Protection Mechanism has sent 12 aircraft and 400 firefighters to Greece. Government officials added those summer wildfires are common in Greece, strong winds and hot weather have made them more intense this year.
Showers will continue on for tomorrow. The stationary rain front that is stretched out horizontally is spreading showers for most regions. Until Friday, southern parts of the country will be under the most influence, with heavy rain warnings in place for Gyeongsang-do and Jeollanam-do province tonight. Heavy downpours will persist for Jeju Island and the coastlines of Gyeongsang-namdo province, with up to 200 millimeters in the forecast. The remainder of Gyeongsang-do province will see up to 150. Central regions, including Chungcheongdo and Gangwon-do province, will see 5 to 40 millimeters. Relatively less rain is in store for the Seoul metropolitan area, with only about 5 millimeters. And for the south coast and Jeju Island in particular, local downpours of 20 to 40 millimeters per hour may lash the region. For those across rivers and valleys, localized flooding is possible, so please take precautions. Tomorrow, Seoul and Daejeon will be starting off at 21 degrees Celsius. Highs in Seoul and Gwangju will get up to 28, Daejeon 27. Gyeongju and Busan will be topping out at 29 degrees. On Sunday, another round of nationwide rain is in the forecast. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
I'm live.
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 이거 없지 텐션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고.
좋아요.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's lying? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Hello, I'm Arirang Müller, Ambassador of Slovenia to the Republic of Korea. Right now, I see Korea shining in the world. Korea has many strengths and the global presence is already here. Slovenia will continue to establish the presence in the international scene. This is also one of the reasons why we opened the embassy in Korea last year. I always thank Arirang TV for playing a big role in promoting Korean information to the world so that many people can access Korean content and get to know all aspects of Korean culture. I hope that people around the world will continue to communicate and sympathize with Korea. Resonating the world, Arirang.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. North Korea tried to launch another spy satellite last Thursday only to fail. The regime said the first and second stage flights of the launch operated successfully, which contradicts what South Korea's defense ministry says. Pyongyang said the next launch will come in October, and many experts expect that to be around the founding of its ruling Workers' Party on October 10th. Meanwhile, North Korea apparently decided to reopen its borders after more than 3 years, though it is a limited reopening as it only approved the return of its nationals abroad. When will foreigners be allowed back in? For an in-depth analysis of the latest events in North Korea, we invite Dr. Go Myung-hyun, Senior Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Mark Berry, Associate Editor Emeritus at the International Journal on World Peace. Good to see you, Mr. Berry.
Good evening.
Good evening. Now, let's start with the most recent news. Dr. Go. So, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un visited the Navy Command, and there he called the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan as gang bosses, right? In an apparent criticism of their very first standalone Trilateral summit. How did you see such remarks?
So I think in addition to calling the leaders of three countries' names, Kim Jong-un also called South Korea as the Republic of Korea, the official name of the country, which is not the usual expression that North Korean leaders use when it comes to South Korea, because this is actually very much intended. It's very intentional on the part of the leaders of North Korea, because they don't use the official name of South Korea because they want to portray the relationship they have with South Korea as a special inter-Korean relations. So the calling names to the leaders of the three countries, Korea, Japan, and the United States, is par for the course for the North Korean leaders. But then I think the calling of South Korea with the official name, by its official name, is a change of, I guess, an approach by the North Koreans that echoes what the Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's sister, did a couple of months ago, and she also addressed South Korea by calling it with its official name, the Republic of Korea. So I think Kim Jong-un, in addition to threatening or complaining about the ongoing joint military drills between Korea and the United States, as well as the holding of the Trilateral summit in Camp David, Kim Jong-un wants to raise the rhetorical heat in the Korean Peninsula by alluding to the fact that North Korea could reconsider its approach to South Korea, which means that it's might not use the prism of inter-Korean relations, which are special relations, and they switch it to more of a normal country-to-country relations, which could make North Korea's threat of using nuclear weapons preemptively more credible.
Right. It's interesting how calling South Korea as its official name was also a noticeable part. Now, Mr. Berry, let's move on to talk about North Korea's recent attempt to launch the spy satellite. So we are going to talk about its failure, but before that, what can we talk about the timing of the launch?
Well, they had announced really just before they launched, a day or two before, that their window for launching would be between August 24th and the 31st. So the first thing you say is, well, gee, that's exactly the same timing as the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises. So there's no coincidence there. But I think even more importantly, because of the potential national significance, if they could have successfully launched a satellite, is the fact that on September 9th, the DPRK is celebrating the 75th anniversary of its national or state founding. So I think the lead up to that is even more important than registering during the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises their discomfort and disagreement with the exercises. So I think it really kind of it's juxtaposed on both the exercises and the September 9th anniversary.
Right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Go, Pyongyang said the rocket's first and second stages operated successfully and that the error occurred at a later stage of the flight. But South Korea's defense ministry said that there are grounds to believe that the space launch vehicle had an abnormal flight from the second stage engine. How do you see such contradictory remarks?
So I would actually give more, I think I find the South Korean observation more credible than the North Korean statement, partly because because the trajectory of the missile or the space vehicle is towards the south. So it means that the South Koreans have a much better vantage point to observe the trajectory of the space vehicle and whether there's a failure or not. So there's more information on the South Korean side. It's also more accurate. But I think the reason why North Koreans claim that the fault or the error lied with the third stage rather than the second stage, which is claimed by South Korea, is that they want to, I think, avoid the impression that they haven't been able to solve a fundamental or structural problem that this particular space vehicle, the Cheolima-1, has. So there is, it's understood that the reason why the Cheolima-1's earlier attempt failed was because of the failure with the second stage. And if the South Korean authorities are correct, North Koreans also registered another failure with the second stage, indicating that the North Koreans haven't been able to solve the technical problem that has existed ever since they first tried to test the Cheolima-1. So there are all these talks and speculations that the North Koreans are launching Cheolima-1 in a very short span of time, despite the fact that they seem to have a very serious problem with their missile. And then the speculation is that the reason why they have this accelerated testing schedule with the Cheolima-1 is because of the political calendar that we see right now unfolding. For instance, the latest launch coincided with the September 9th, the Foundation of the Republic Day, and the upcoming announced launch will coincide with the October 10th Foundation of the Party Day. So I think for some reason, North Koreans are not following a technical a calendar or schedule. They are rather following a political calendar without being able to solve their technical problem, which means that the next announced upcoming test might also end in failure.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Berry, though the regime relatively quickly announced the failure of the launch through its foreign-targeted state-run media, there has been no coverage of the related news in domestic media that North Korean citizens can access. Why not tell its own people?
Well, you know, they did have a small mention on KCNA, and obviously that's more oriented towards the outside world. But I don't think it means that nobody has access to KCNA within North Korea. So I don't think it's being kept as a state secret that the second satellite launch was a failure. But obviously the fact that if indeed it is not run as of today in Nodong Shinmun or on Korean Central Television, then yes, indeed, they're keeping it from the population overall, although the highest echelons surely know. But it just means that why play up something that's not a success? And they have no obligation to. And I'm sure Kim Jong-un, much like many other comparable regimes, sees no need to announce to the population anything that is not in his best interest for them to know. And I think it's as simple as that. And that pattern will likely continue because everything is sort of a zero sum. It's either an outstanding success or proclaimed as an outstanding success, or they don't mention it at all to their own people. So this is really, daily life in North Korea.
Right, so there is no need to tell its own people because it was not successful. All right, Dr. Go, North Korea announced that its next launch is going to be in October, and many experts are already saying that it is going to be around October 10th, right? What is special about that day?
Well, this year's October 10th marks the 78th anniversary of the foundation of the North Korea's Workers' Party. So it's a major anniversary for the North Koreans, and in the past, this particular day coincided with the unveiling of significant weapon systems. For instance, the Hwasong-15 ICBMs, as well as other missile systems that North Koreans have developed so far. So anyways, our eyes are on that day because we are expecting North Koreans to mount a parade again, and then maybe they want to unveil something new. But on the other hand, I think North Korea Koreans also need to have a cause for celebration. The last couple of years has been especially tough in the North Korean economy, and especially for Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un has been showing signs that he's very stressed and under pressure to deliver something to the people of North Korea. And this in fact reflects the economic crisis that the country is subject to, and especially the people are suffering from it. But then the interesting thing is that much of the reason why the North Koreans are suffering from an economic crisis is because of Kim Jong-un's own choices made back in 2021 at the 8th Party Congress, which marked the total shift in economic policy for North Korea. If before 2021, North Koreans had chosen to coexist with the market, with the underground economy, give some agency to the people of North Korea. After 2021, Kim Jong-un announced a policy of economic decentralization, which essentially banned the market system in North Korea. And I think the banning of the market in North Korea has a lot to do with the shortfall in economic outputs, especially in food production, which is causing starvation in some parts of the country. So I think Kim Jong-un knows that these economic policies are not working, and the people in North Korea, besides him, has not much to celebrate. So I think that creates a pressure, not just on Kim Jong-un, but also his advisors to deliver a success. And what's interesting is that North Korea has been quite successful when it comes to weapons development. This is also part of the weapons development roadmap that the party had announced back in 2021. So they've been very quite successful with the weapons development, as we know. And I think that's why Kim Jong-un is putting all his hope in the success of the upcoming space vehicle test.
Right, I see. Well, we are going to shift our gears to reopening, but before that, Dr. Go, it seems like, as you have already said, Pyongyang is in a rush to make this satellite launch quite successful. But if Kim Jong-un needs something to deliver to its people, why does he, keep why is he wanting to launch this space satellite? I mean, could there be...
He has another choice. He has another choice. I think he has other, for instance, other ways to showcase success. So this could be still an option for the North Koreans if they carry out the Cholima test again, and if they fail, which it's quite probable. Then North Koreans might decide to carry out the test of an ICBM that they already have deployed. So that's an option, and they could even carry out a nuclear test. But this doesn't really go with the jive, with the tone of the Party Foundation Day, which is more celebratory, whereas the nuclear test is more threatening to the outside world. So I think that's why, I mean, we're hoping that in a way that the North Koreans fail with the space vehicle test, but at the same time, the failure doesn't change, or provoke them in a way, or make them angry, that could result in the testing of another nuclear device.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Barry, North Korea decided to reopen its border on Sunday after more than 3 years of tight virus curves. However, given that Pyongyang only approved the return of its nationals abroad, it is seen as a limited border reopening. Who are these people that are returning home?
Before I answer your question, I just want to add to what Dr. Go said. Ankit Panda, one of the best missile analysts in the United States with the Carnegie Endowment, when the attempt was made to launch the satellite on August 24th, the first thing he tweeted was 3 words: space is hard. In other words, they're attempting to do almost the impossible given their technological ability and how they work. To answer your question, this is a very unusual situation because I don't recall North Korea being as shut down and closed down as it has been since the pandemic began in early 2020 at any other time in its 75-year history. So you can bet your bottom dollar that everybody returning, and I think initially you're going to see people who are working abroad, your restaurant workers. There was several busloads totaling about 700 people reportedly who returned to North Korea the other day. Those people are going to go through, I don't want to call it re-education programs, but they're going to get a welcome home, and here are the several weeks of workshops and lectures we're going to give you to kind of tighten up their ideological strength. Also, this will enable diplomats to return. But actually, it's a two-way thing, because it also signals that some people who normally would more freely be able to travel outside of North Korea, in particular North Korean officials, will now be able to do so. And what I'm getting at is that it used to be that in Beijing, senior North Korean officials, under the guise of being trading agents, would regularly fly out to Beijing, but actually they were affiliated with the office of, let's say, Kim Jong-il at the time, back in, let's say, 2005. So there's not been that opportunity for these authoritative representatives of the office of today, Kim Jong-un, to go to Beijing and meet any counterparts, whether they be from the United States or representing European Union countries or anyone else. So what I look forward to is the fact that some of these people who just simply couldn't do their normal activities will be able to fly out to Beijing, Vladivostok, and by the way, of course, the commercial airline routes have sort of resumed to both Beijing and Vladivostok. So the beginnings of quiet contact and dialogue that couldn't really begin in the ways that they might have in the past, or in fact did in the past, going back to the early 1990s, will have the opportunity to begin as some of these North Korean officials, some of whom are very closely affiliated with Kim Jong-un's office, have a chance to finally go to their normal stomping grounds, such as Beijing and elsewhere, particularly in the socialist world. But as far as the ability of diplomats who are currently based in Pyongyang to leave, or those who were forced to return back home, such as to Moscow, and be able to return back, I could see that happening in coming months as well.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, many say the reason behind such a decision to reopen its borders are economic difficulties. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's our time for North Korea to reopen its borders. Obviously, there are this pent-up need for the North Koreans who are based abroad to return home. For instance, North Korean diplomats haven't been able to come home for many years. But then also there are strong economic incentives for North Korea to reopen the borders, because part of the reason why the North Korean economy is undergoing crisis is not just because they're not able to generate money. It's also because of a lack of essential items, and then such as food items or household items and so forth, which they mostly rely on the outside, and except for some part of the food items. So they need to re-import stuff from the outside, but then so far North Korea had a very strong quarantine measures. So sometimes the import of essential items were delayed at the border, at the quarantine centers, for more than 3 months or 6 months even. So this situation will be resolved if the borders are reopened. But another essential activity for the North Koreans is clearly the activities to generate foreign currency income. So tourism is exactly a kind of important source of revenue for the North Koreans. And before the pandemic, Kim Jong-un had invested a lot in infrastructure, in the tourism infrastructure in North Korea, such as the Wonsan Galma International Tourism Resort. I think that's the name, how they call it. That's near Wonsan. And the reason why he developed this mega tourism project was to attract Chinese tourists. So with China adopting a with COVID policy, and then which normalizes the public health measures that have been in place so many years, and North Korea reopening its borders, it really increases the chance, the tantalizing prospect of North Koreans being able to host Chinese tourists, which incidentally it's one of the ways to bypass sanctions that are currently in place against North Korea. So I think this is the reason why North Koreans are trying to normalize the COVID situation in the country, because there are clearly economic payoffs that they can expect from it.
Then could we say this reopening of its borders rather proves the economic difficulties this regime is going through?
North Korea has been going through economic crisis ever since it was founded in a way. But then I think there are clearly more pressure on North Korea to renormalize the economy as soon as possible.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Barry, some are expressing concerns that North Korean defectors in China could be forcibly repatriated to the north. How do you see this possibility, and is there any way to prevent that from happening?
I think it will happen. There's a standing agreement, understanding between China and North Korea. China doesn't want them anyway, but it's also leverage for China because they maybe in segments they will return those people that are already being held in some sort of detention. But then it's leverage for China and saying, look, we returned all of these escapees back to you. You can do with them what you feel is appropriate. But in return, we don't want to see a seventh nuclear test or whatever is the quid pro quo that China will seek. But unfortunately, to answer your question, I don't think there's any way to see these people being prevented, no matter how much the UN and its human rights agencies may protest. It's a bilateral issue, and China will not change the policy that it has carried out over the past several decades.
I see your point. Well, Dr. Go, so for now, it's being viewed as a limited border reopening. But when do you expect foreigners will be able to enter?
So there are signs that the North Koreans might be receiving back the foreign diplomats. They originally were posted to the country before, but who left the country because of the COVID quarantine measures. The signal for that is the return of the North Koreans' own diplomats. So the expectation is that after the Guangzhou Asian Games wraps up in September, North Korea might allow these diplomats to come back. But then obviously for the country to be fully open, I think there are other necessary conditions. And I think that could be, in fact, normalization of security situation in the Korean Peninsula, as well as the economic situation inside the country, because North Koreans have a lot of incentive to hide what's going on. For instance, this probably precludes the return of the international aid groups back into the country. So chances that we are going to see a very prolonged, slow process of North Korea reopening the borders, receiving very selected group of people, such as diplomats, but then for the country to be fully open, I mean, it never been fully open, obviously, but to receive back like essential personnel such as international organization personnel as well as the international aid groups, I think that's going to take a much longer time.
Right, I see your point. Now, Mr. Barry, with the reopening, it has become highly likely that North Korea will send a group of athletes to participate in the Asian Games being held in Hangzhou, China. How do you see the possibility of Pyongyang participating in the Games?
I think it's highly likely. I mean, in the United States, we don't think very much about the Asian Games because it's not part of our hemisphere. And if we even have a Pan-American Games, most Americans are not aware of it. But there is something called the Olympics. And so I think what North Korea is aiming at is they want to take advantage of a slow reopening, as so aptly described by Dr. Go, so that they can participate in the Paris Olympics. I don't think there'll be a unified team, as there was in 2018. But the reason they participated in the Jakarta Asian Games in 2018 was because that was at the high point of ROK-DPRK relations, and just a couple weeks before President Moon had gone to Pyongyang to meet with Kim Jong-un and give various talks and so forth. That was a high point of the relationship. But I think at this point, at least on the world stage, North Korea wants to be seen as normalizing its give and take with the outside world, albeit with stronger missile capability and military capability. But I will say this as a conclusion: North Korea is known over its 75-year history to go through cycles, and you can't change its behavior when it's in a certain part of its trajectory of either going up or coming down from a certain high point in its cycle. So perhaps what we're seeing is not only the beginning of an opening, but the beginning of, as we head towards 2024, of North Korea being a little bit more open to give and take with the rest of the world, but from what it believes is a stronger position of strength. And at the same time, it will see what happens in the United States in 2024, particularly in the fall, and particularly how its mentors and backers, China and Russia, also react to that. So a lot awaits us in the coming 14 months.
All right, I see. We'll have to wait and see. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Mr. Barry and Dr. Go, for your time and
My
insight.
pleasure.
We really appreciate it. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.